first presentation of the year. It's an honor, really. So this presentation actually came, I was driving home from last semester in May, and I was listening to a Darknet Diaries podcast about this topic. And so I went home, read through a bunch of court documents that it referenced about this case, and I thought it was really interesting, so I kind of put my own spin on it, did some more research, and created this talk. But first, who am I? I'm Nathaniel Beckstead. I'm a fourth year. This is my last semester. I'll be graduating in December, which is very scary. I don't know what I'll do with my life. But I like to do blue team a lot. I've blue teamed a lot of different competitions, repping that ISTS 17 shirt. A lot of my projects are with automation and the cloud. So if you're interested in that stuff, definitely hit me up. I do a lot of projects. My GitHub's full of random, partially completed projects. I'll pick one for the hackathon. I don't know. And I guess I have a legal interest now. Court documents weren't as bad as I thought they would be, and they're somewhat interesting. So if you like policy, court, legal stuff too, we can definitely talk about that. I blog at scriptingus.life, and like I said, my GitHub's pretty active. This past summer, I worked at IBM, hired through their managed security services team, but a lot of my projects were with IRIS, which is Incident Response and Intelligence Services. So I did a lot of automation with their threat intel platform and a couple incident response tools too, which was super cool. And I also worked at KeyBank in the SOC 2 years ago, which was, it's cool to get the same different experiences with internal security as well as a consultant. I would definitely recommend that for your co-ops. And who is this? Well, this is Roman Seleznev. He is a Russian native, born in Vladivostok, Russia. But right now, he currently resides in a Federal Correctional Institute of Butner in North Carolina. And he'll be there until about 2058, I think. So there's a lot to this. We're just basically going to unpack his life in this talk. So to give you a little bit more information about him, so he was born in Vladivostok, which is on the east coast of Russia, but he also had homes in Moscow and Bali, Indonesia, which, fun fact, doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States, which may come in handy later on. So format of this talk is basically going to be a timeline. There's several phases of his career as a cyber criminal, and we're basically going to walk through each one. So he was basically his entire adult life in cybercrime. So he started in 2002 at the ripe age of 18 on these illegal darknet forums, and he started selling fools, F-U-L-L-S, which are basically entire identities, name, date of birth, social security number, which is what you need to commit identity theft. So he sold those. I'm not sure, there aren't too many details about going back this late, but he got a hold of them somehow, started selling them on the darknet to make money. But then 3 years later, that wasn't profitable enough. It was kind of hard to get social security numbers, even back in the early 2000s. So he transitioned to credit card numbers, which is what we'll be talking about mostly today. That started in 2005. And that's when he started to be tracked by the Secret Service, which, if you didn't know, besides protecting the president, they also deal in fraud and counterfeiting. It's really interesting. I'd highly recommend if you can go to DC and get a tour of the Secret Service office. It's super cool. So they're the ones that are going to be investigating him throughout the 2000s and actually prosecuting this case. And so he's now dealing in credit card numbers, being tracked by the Secret Service. How did he do it? It's pretty simple. He basically scanned for OpenRDP on the internet, logged in, just guessing credentials. So he targeted mostly small businesses in the United States, and a lot of them shared the same tech provider. So this is early 2000s. Everyone's just kind of outsourcing their tech. Like, what is this computer thing that I have to do now? And this tech provider used the same password on their, basically like their access to that vendor box. So he had a list of like these vendor passwords, and it got him into a ton of machines. And he would drop malware that basically intercepted these credit card numbers from point-of-sale systems and then exfiltrated them to several different servers. There were some in Ukraine and Russia, but he also had one in Virginia, McLean, Virginia, which was a Hop1, just a virtual private server. And that's kind of where he did a lot of his operation. And eventually the US did get access to that, and they had a network tap on it. And so they get a lot of good information from that. So the US does some investigating. Obviously, they don't really reveal their techniques, but somehow magically they discover him to be Roman Seleznev. So they fly over to Russia, and they meet with the FSB, the Federal Security Bureau, I think, which is formerly the KGB. And they basically say, like, hey, there's this hacker that's attacking small businesses in the US. We want some more information on him and prosecute him. And conveniently, 4 weeks later, NCOX goes dark. He announces his retirement, and there's no more activity from him. So a slight overlook by the Secret Service. Seleznev's father is actually a member of the Russian Duma, which is like the Congress of Russia. He has a little bit of power, and somehow he received federal protection basically from the FSB and their cybercrime unit. So yeah, we're not really going to be touching him. He's pretty high up, I guess, his father is. So yeah, this makes it really hard. But in 2009, so 3 months later, he comes back as Track 2. We don't know that, but very big red flag. So he comes back on this forum. He's a new user, and he's instantly a verified and promoted seller on this forum, which is a little bit fishy. You know, Darknet pretty much runs on reputation. You've kind of got to build up your brand so that this new guy just coming onto the platform and he's instantly a seller. It's a little bit fishy, and we know this guy is not new to selling credit cards. So he created 2 sites, track2.name and bulba.cc, and they had some pretty big innovations for the credit card selling industry. So one of them was automated purchasing. So now rather than messaging the seller, being like, hey, I'd like 3,000 MasterCard cards, now you can just go to his site, put in whatever searches you want, and download that zip file, which really speeds up your operation. You don't have to be dealing with these requests. People can get them as soon as they want them. And so he's doing really good right now. At his height, on one day in April 2011, he posted 1 million fresh dumps in a single day. Not credit card numbers, but actual dumps of thousands of cards, which is a huge scale at this point, especially for 2011. This is also when he's indicted by the Secret Service. So basically, the Secret Service is saying, like, hey, you're wanted, and that allows them to create warrants now, like ask for warrants. And so the first warrant they get is for his Yahoo email address. So they can kind of peer into his life, what accounts he has, and kind of what he's doing, how he's communicating. So that provides some very valuable information. So he's living a pretty good life. He has some fancy cars, goes on vacation a lot to his home in Bali, Indonesia. He's living it up. One time he goes to this cafe in Morocco for vacation. He's up on the 2nd story, and the Secret Service is there, and they're about to apprehend him. And just conveniently, there's a terrorist bombing in this cafe. And Seleznev has a pretty serious head injury, and he's immediately flown back to Moscow for treatment. So I think this one actually was a coincidence, but it's very strange that you just happen to be set up to apprehend this guy, and there's a bombing. Like, how often does that happen? But he's in a coma for 2 weeks, and then he basically spends a year of his life in the hospital. And then 2 years after that, basically living next to the hospital so that he can go have surgeries on his spine and his brain. Obviously, he's not doing a whole lot of hacking in the hospital, and his shop closes in 2012 due to a lack of fresh dumps, pretty much. But 2 years later, he's back to hacking, this time as Tupac. Yeah, and he uses Tupac a lot in his banner ads and his marketing, which is pretty funny. But, of course, he's come back, and he's tons of new improvements. So rather than selling his personal dumps that he gets, he's also selling for other hackers. So he's a known hacker at this point. He's got a great scale of things, and he's selling for some of the biggest dumps of this time while it's in operation. So some of you might have heard of is the Target breach, the Michaels breach, and Home Depot. Those were all sold. Those credit card numbers were found on his site being advertised for sale, which is crazy that like his shop is basically the site to go for any credit card you want. And it also has 24/7 support now, which is pretty cool. This is not a one-man operation anymore. He's got customer support. It was basically likened to Amazon at the time. You could search for either like zip code that you want. So, they have geographical like alerts basically. So like you can't make a purchase in Virginia and then also make a purchase half an hour later in California. So you can search for zip code of where you want those cards to be from. You can search for providers, so like, or payment processor, Visa, MasterCard, Discover. It's pretty high-tech site for its time, and especially for the dark web too. He also made a site called POS Dumps, which is basically a tutorial site. So people buy these dumps from a site, but now what do I do with them? Well, he'll teach you. Basically shows you how to write card numbers and card data to blank cards so you can take them to the ATM and withdraw cash from them. And with that as well, he teaches you how to find the zip code related to a card and also the credit limit so you don't set off as much of alert from the banks. And obviously he also advertised his Tupac site. And it's doing pretty well for the dark web. In its first month of operation, it had about 3,300 unique visitors, which is pretty good. It's more than my blog. Won't say by how much, but it's a pretty large margin. However, in 2014, he is captured. So how did this happen? Well, on July 1st, they received a tip that he was in the Maldives vacationing, but he would be leaving 4 days later on the 5th. Which doesn't really help the Secret Service because they don't have an extradition treaty with the US, and it's an 18-hour flight from Hawaii, which really cuts into your time. You only have 4 days to basically figure all of this out. So they basically come up with an agreement with the Maldives of they won't interfere if you arrest him and take him back to the US. His lawyers really harp on this a lot in their appeals and in litigation. And they won't say that he was arrested in the Maldives. They'll say he was kidnapped, and he's basically being held illegally because they don't have an extradition treaty. But they do fly over, they charter a flight, and he's intercepted at the airport as he's about to leave. He's flown to Guam, which Guam in July is not very pleasant, especially when you're in prison. But he puts up a fight there, and he doesn't want to be flown to mainland US. He stays there for a couple of weeks, which just sounds painful to me. But eventually he's flown to the US, and they proceed with litigation. So they do get his laptop. It's powered on, and they never power it off on their flight to Guam, and they do some forensics while they're there. So they had access to his Yahoo email before. And of course, you get, when you create an account, they show you your username and password for some reason. And it was shown that he was consistently using Smouse as his username and ochko123 as his password. So I'll let you Google what ochko is in Russian. But so what do we think his user or his password was? The keys to his criminal enterprise, basically. Any guesses?
Hunter 2.
All right. Close. Same password he used for everything else, of course. How could you remember any other passwords than ochko123? So yeah, they get into his laptop, and you're basically over at that point. He didn't really have any good security besides this one password. And on his laptop, he was taught with 1.7 million credit card numbers, which, yeah, that's pretty damning evidence to say you're not really getting away after that. So that was the big piece of evidence that they show in court. And in 2017, he's sentenced. So why would it take 3 years to process this guy? And he does go to court and take it all the way to trial. Doesn't take a plea deal, which is just crazy because you're caught. They have years of evidence on you, and he still puts up a fight. This should be an open and shut case. So basically, well, his father's a member of the Russian Congress, pretty much, and they think at first maybe Russia can put some weight on the U.S. and get him back to Russia. But that doesn't work out. In their phone calls, which it's all public, online, through court documents. I can share those with you if you want. But they talk about a bunch of different plans, basically, to get him out. They talk about escape and code words. They're like, there's this Uncle Andre and trips to the hospital, some very strange code speak. But that ends up not working out. So they try to bribe the prosecutors. And they say in their phone calls again that they'll pay them as much as they make in a single year, which turns out to be $10 million. I don't know what federal prosecutor makes $10 million in a year. They must have some crazy salaries in Russia. But yeah, obviously that doesn't work out either. But yeah, once you're a prosecutor, you can't really go easy on the person you're prosecuting, or it'll look like you took the bribe. So they take it all the way to trial, and you don't really have a good excuse at that point. A jury of US citizens, when you're accused of basically forcing small businesses to close. Some of them went bankrupt with fees or fines from payment processors because of your PCI compliance, things like that. The trust in your business after you've been hacked and millions of credit card numbers have been sold from your business. Yeah, so there's a lot of evidence against him. He's convicted. I think the trial takes like 8 days, but it's pretty open and shut at that point from the jury. And so the US has federal processing or sentencing guidelines that basically say, like, was this crime committed outside of the US? Plus 2 points. Was the damage in excess of $5 million? Plus 30 points. There's a bunch of different things. So they add it all up, and he's at 59 points, which says recommends a life sentence, pretty much. The funny thing is that the guidelines max out at 43 points. So yeah, I know cybercrime can be pretty weird because when you have millions and millions of credit card numbers, that could be like thousands of life sentences according to some laws. But yeah, that's still a lot. He was a huge player. So what eventually happened is he got 27 years in prison, which the prosecutors were pushing for 30. They come out to a little under it, but that's still the largest sentence handed down for a cybercrime. And the prosecutors pretty much pushed for this because it's not every day you get a Russian hacker under your control. Normally they stay in Russia. This was a very rare chance to actually prosecute one, so they wanted to make an example of him. He was charged with initially 40 counts, but two of those counts were from a restaurant. I don't know why they dropped those, but they did. But it was 9 counts of hacking, 10 counts of wire fraud, and a couple other things. One of them is possession of 15 or more unauthorized access devices, and where an access device is like a credit card number. So 1.7 million is slightly more than 15. So he was basically sentenced to pay $169 million in restitution, and that was to the 3,700 financial institutions, like banks, that had suffered damage from this because of their fraud protection and things they needed to put in place. And he also has to pay about $500,000 to the victim businesses that he hacked. And so this was just a federal case. He was also charged in Nevada, Atlanta, and the state of Washington for different things. So like one of the payment processors decided to also pursue a case outside of this. And he actually appealed one in the state of Washington one as early as March of this year. And you can actually read those documents, and they actually live stream all of their, or not live stream, but they record all of their court hearings, which they're pretty boring, but just turn it on in the background and you can listen to lawyers debate about why your Russian hacker should be let go. So yeah, that was pretty much the life of Roman Seleznev. He did write about 10-page confession letter, basically saying like, I've had a hard life. I turned to cybercrime because it was my only option. And yeah, maybe it's true. Maybe he's just trying to get out. But he also got a degree in hospitality and restaurant management, which is cool. I don't know. Maybe he'll start a cafe. What? From RT? No, unfortunately not. Yeah, we do. Yeah, but it's in North Carolina now. Could write to him if you want. I thought about it, but I don't know. Feels kind of weird. So yeah, yeah.
Have you thought about writing to him to let him know that he was the inspiration for an entire presentation at our computer security club?
I should. It should I don't know.
He can sponsor us.
I don't know. That might be a little shady. That might compromise our integrity a little bit. We'll have a vote later. We can see. But yeah, any other questions about this? That's pretty much all I have.